Hi, this is Nolan from Benchmark, and in today's video, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a comparison so I can hopefully inform you on what the best setup is for you. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at a network Rover and comparing it to a basin Rover, and I want to give you guys kind of what the advantages and what the disadvantages of both setups are so you got a better idea of what's best for you. So with that in mind, let's get right into the video here. So to begin here, we're going to take a look at the network Rover. As of 2024, this is probably the most common surveying setup, and that's for a couple of good reasons. First off, and probably most importantly for a lot of survey shops, this is the lowest barrier to entry. This is going to cost you the least amount of money to get started with, and that's because instead of needing 2 receivers like a basin Rover, you're only going to need 1 receiver. On top of that, a network Rover gives you a ton of flexibility. You can hop out of your vehicle and start surveying immediately. There's no downtime getting a base set up. You're not monkeying around trying to get radio settings going. You hook up to the network and you start surveying. Now, that does come with a couple of drawbacks. This is not all just rosy pictures for your network Rover users. You do have to do a little bit of research before you purchase one of these systems, because you have to make sure the network you are planning to use has full coverage in the area you're looking to work. So in Canada, where I'm located, and for a lot of our customers in the US, there's sometimes not network coverage where you're located. It could work in one area, but it won't work in the other, which means if you need to get RTK accuracy in that area, you're not going to be able to. That includes areas without cell coverage. If you don't have cell coverage, you can't get corrections to your receiver. And if you don't have that network coverage, you're going to be SOL, unfortunately. On top of that, for some networks, you're going to have an additional subscription cost. So for VRS systems like a SmartNet, CanCell's CanNet up here in Canada, there's BrantNet, there's a whole host of other ones I'm forgetting about, you have an additional subscription cost. So yes, your receiver may be an initial lower starting cost, but over time, those subscription fees can really add up and mean this ends up being more expensive than a traditional basin Rover setup. With that in mind, there are networks that are free for a lot of our US customers, especially those down in the south. They have access to the Department of Transports for their whatever local state. I think Kentucky, Alabama, Florida I think has one, Texas has one, depends on your use case, though they may not allow you to use that all the time. But you actually get a free network that you can use. Again though, there's a bit of a caveat to that. Those networks are not always going to be putting out the latest signals, which means you are not going to be able to get the best out of your receiver. You're not going to be able to get all of the latest signals that are going to give you the best performance. And I'll link to a video in the description down below where I kind of explain what that means for you in your surveying lives day to day when you don't get all of those latest signals. Okay, so the next system we're going to look at is a base and Rover. As the name implies, instead of using 1 receiver like a network Rover, you're using 2 receivers with a basin Rover setup. So what that means is you need to find a place that you can set up your base on a tripod. You'll leave it there to broadcast continuously while you're working. That receiver just sits there and does nothing else but yell out to the world where it is and what it sees, and that information is used by the Rover to calculate its position. This has several benefits to you when you're out in the field. When you have your own base station, you get to control your own baseline. Now, for those of you who have read spec sheets on RTK receivers like myself, you'll know that the accuracy is often reported in something like 8 millimeters plus minus 1 part per million. So what that means is for every kilometer or so from the base, you're going to be adding a millimeter of uncertainty to your result, your RTK result. Now with the network Rover, you have no control over your distance from the base station. With a basin Rover, you have total control over your setup. What that also means is you're not reliant on a network, you're not reliant on cell coverage, you're completely self-reliant. As you can broadcast those corrections over a UHF radio, there's nothing stopping you from working, unlike with a network Rover where you can be beholden to a bunch of things that are outside of your control. In addition to that, a basin Rover gives you a lot more flexibility over a network Rover, in addition to that aforementioned network coverage. With a basin Rover, you can also split the set. Let's say you have an area where you have good network coverage and you're saying, man, I really just need to get this project done a little bit quicker. With a basin Rover, you can split that set and run one guy as a network Rover and the other guy's a Network Rover, and just ignore having a base. You don't need that kind of setup if you're running 2 Network Rovers. However, again, just like the Network Rover, there's a couple drawbacks you need to be aware of. With a base and Rover, there's obviously that higher initial startup cost. You've got 2 receivers that you're going to have to pay for. Yes, you don't have any subscription, but that upfront cost can scare a lot of people off because it is essentially double the price of a Network Rover, as you have double the amount of equipment. In addition to that, it can be quite a pain sometimes, depending on where you're working and what your job site looks like, to find somewhere safe to set up your base. Remember, your base has to sit there on the tripod. It can't move, it can't be bumped, it can't be vibrated, that kind of thing. Otherwise, it will affect your results at the Rover. So you need somewhere that's away from everybody else. It needs to be safe. You need to be certain that somebody's not going to drive into it. In fact, we had a fellow that had his hit by a golf cart on a retirement community, which was a whole story there that was quite entertaining. That's maybe for another day. And in addition, you don't want somebody potentially grabbing the base and running off. So you kind of need an area that you know the base will be safe, which can constrain how you're working. Plus, the base needs to have a very good view of the sky. So if you're working in a city and you don't have any open fields near you, it's maybe pretty constricted. It can be kind of difficult to find a good place for the base. So you got to keep that in mind when you're out there working with your base and Rover. So to kind of summarize this, for those of you who are maybe looking to get into surveying equipment, you don't know the exact setup you need, this is how I would break it down for you. Those who are going to benefit the most from the Network Rover are those who are going to be working in the same area continuously, have good cell coverage, and they have a good available network, preferably something with access to as many constellations and signals is possible. Those who are going to want to avoid a Network Rover are typically rural users, those who are going to be moving around a lot. So maybe you're going from state to state, maybe you're going from city to city. It can just be hard to keep track of what networks are available and where you have cell coverage. So for those kind of users, I would maybe stay away from a Network Rover. On the flip side, those who are going to benefit the most from a base and Rover setup are those who need to control their accuracy, who need to control their baselines, and maybe those who don't know what the network coverage in their area looks like. Yes, there's a higher initial startup cost, and you do have to take that into account, but you have a lot more flexibility with a base and Rover when compared to a Network Rover, as you control everything in your setup. Those who are probably going to want to avoid a base and Rover are those who want to avoid any complexities in their setup, and maybe those who have a lot of users who are going to be using this equipment that you maybe don't want to teach all the ins and outs of having a more complex setup like you would with a base and Rover. With that being said, that is everything for today's video. I hope you learned a thing or two about a base and Rover. Hopefully it made a purchasing decision slightly easier for you. And if you have a moment, I'd please ask you to hit that like button down below, or leave a comment if you have any questions about your setup or what setup's best for you. In the comment section, we're more than happy to answer any questions you might have. And let's say you don't want to use that comment section, please feel free to call us at 1-888-286-3204 or visit us on the web at bench-mark.ca.